What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking modern death metal bands. Alright, and before you ask, my definition of modern is pretty broad here. It's basically any of the bands that were too late to the game to fit into like my classic death metal bands list. Mostly bands that have been releasing albums since the 2000s. But let's get into it with Artificial Brain, which is one of my personal favorites, like kind of the heir to the throne of Gorguts. Some have said extremely technical band, insane songwriting, but also like a good balance, because sometimes these more technical, crazy, somewhat avant-garde groups lose the plot a little bit and they just become technical for the sake of being technical, but not so with Artificial Brain. Like, I find their songs to be incredibly engaging for the most part, and just great albums. Looking forward to hearing more from them probably soon. So I'm going to put them at perfection. Next up, we got one of the big bands in town right now, the talk of the town, so to speak, Venom Prison. And really enjoy this band as well. Like, they have been putting out some absolute bangers. They've got kind of a different twist on the formula. I love their cover arts too. And especially this latest album, I will still contend is their best. Like, I think that pulling in these melodic elements and making some changes and more diversity in the songwriting is really boding well for them, and I really appreciated that. I know some people are just going to prefer that they stick to the more brutal, grindy, miserable sound that they had before, which is good too, but personally, I think that they see the road forward very clearly, and I'm excited for them for that. I'm going to put them at fantastic. All right, another band that's being talked about quite a bit, and also recently at the time of recording this had released a new album, and that is Hath. Now, these guys, I don't know, something about it has not fully clicked with me. Lots of people seem to love them. I'm sure my audience, this will be a big point of contention, and let me know down in the comments where you disagree, because this is just my subjective opinion after all. There is no objective ranking going on here, but personally, I'm a little lukewarm on these guys. I think they have a lot of elements I really like. I just don't think it fully coalesces for me. Their debut EP, absolutely loved. Hive, I think that was their first release. But in any case, check out that. Like, it's super dark and dank, and there's a lot of like Opethian guitar work in there, and they still have that, but they've also now like pulled in, there's elements of like Lamb of God that come forward at times, and it's cool, but I don't know, like, I listened to the album and I just don't get a lot from it. So for that reason, they're going down in kind of okay, not my thing, but just know, like, every band on this list I think is good in some way. I just want to differentiate, and again, I'm only doing 4 bands per tier. I picked a nice selection of 20 that I got help from the Discord to source them. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but let's move on. All right, another band I've never like fully gotten into is Blood Incantation. Now, these guys, their instrumentation is beyond reproach. Like, there's a lot of fantastic musicianship going on here, lots of technicality, and then lots of experimentation, which I respect in that they've just dropped a completely ambient album, which is kind of neat. Not really my thing, but ultimately, like, I could put them in good tier for me personally. I'm not super drawn in by their music, but I highly respect what they're doing. And again, I respect any band that's willing to take risks, and they certainly do. Decapitated is a band that has been pretty big for a while now. I'm digging into their discography. Depending on when you're watching this, I may have my Decapitated tier list with my thoughts on all of their albums up. But yeah, I think as a whole, I really like this band. I like their earlier material, especially. I think once you start to get into the reunion stuff, and I really like the new single with Tatiana from Ginger, and interested again, kind of like with Venom Prison, to see them maybe expand in some more melodic directions, try some new things. But I also like their kind of like, not their first albums, but like maybe like going to their third album on into some of their other stuff. Pretty good. So overall, like, not one of my favorites on this list, but I'm excited for them, and it was fun digging into their discography. I'm also going to put them at good tier. Inferi is a band that I kind of threw in one of my personal choices here as far as like melodic death metal mixed with progressive death metal mixed with just elements of like technical death metal. You get all of it here in one awesome package. These guys are great. And then like Malcolm, the guitarist, and Stevie, the vocalist, are basically the forefront of the Artisan Era label, which is dropping so many amazing bands and putting them on the map. And all around awesome, amazing guitar work, good balance again of like kind of catchy songwriting with the technicality. And they really don't have a bad album. Like, they don't have that album that maybe like I love to the point that like I want to listen to it every single day, but they just do seem to get better and better. Their latest release may be their strongest so far. The EP before that was really great. Just lots of great things to say about this band. They're maybe not like the tip top, but if you haven't checked them out, they're definitely worth your time. I'm going to put them at great tier. All right, Aborted. Here's where we kind of stretch that modern label, because these guys have been around for quite some time, but I would say it's not until recently that they've really been like getting that traction. I think there was a period in the 2000s where they were pretty big, but I did a tier list on them, and in my opinion, it took them a while to truly get their footing. You know, like there was a lot of kind of like regurgitated, recycled material that wasn't really up to snuff and pretty inconsistent. Personally, I would say it wasn't until Global Flatline that they truly kind of like hit their stride and found their sound. And especially Retrogore is where they finally just like took hold. Like, that is a like perfect death metal record in my opinion. And it's just fantastic. And pretty much every album they've dropped since then has been close to or on that level. And again, I love the mixture of the technicality and just the riffing and the hooks and the sense of humor, the callbacks to classic horror movies. Like, it's kind of the whole package. The album art too recently is that like kind of technicolor, often very like pink and purpley and green, bright looking stuff is just awesome to look at and fits the music perfectly. I'm going to put these guys at great tier. I could almost put them higher if not for kind of the inconsistency over time. In kind of a similar vein, we have Cattle Decapitation. These guys have definitely been stomping around for a long time, but also, like, just now, I feel like really getting their due. They've been big for a while, but it was when I heard the Anthropocene extinction that they really took hold for me. I know some people got in a lot earlier than that, but that album is just incredible, and the latest one was really strong too. I still kind of prefer the Anthropocene extinction, and that's a mouthful to say, but these guys are really unique too, which I definitely appreciate. They've got just the like classic death metal cred and roots, but then they throw their own spin on it. They bring in the death grind elements, and then the vocals are so interesting. Like, nobody else sounds quite like these guys. You've got the classic growls, but then you've also got those weird nasally, shrill, clean sort of sounding vocals that just sound like totally demonic and weird, and I love them. I think these guys may very well belong at perfection tier. Like, they're definitely close to the top. Archspire, I debated potentially putting these guys at perfection too, because they have not dropped a bad album. Everything they've done so far has been absolutely incredible and only continues to get better each time. One of my favorite albums of 2021 with their latest one. Holy shit, that album is so good. And these guys also know that an album only needs to be as long as it needs to be. Like, it's just, they get in, they get out, they leave you wanting more. Every single musician is giving 100,000% on these things. They've got those unique, syncopated, almost like hip-hop influenced vocals that sound different than anyone else, sometimes with that like machine gun delivery. They're doing the fun music videos too. I just love the shit out of these guys. They just are so much fun to listen to, and also extremely proficient with their instruments. The only reason I'm not going to put them at perfection is that they're still pretty early on. I mean, they only have 3 full-length albums, and so they haven't like had the test of time put to them like some of these other groups have had to endure. So for now, I'm going to put them at fantastic, but pretty high at that. Horrendous. Excellent fusion here of like that old school death metal sound, but also with more modern progressive influences to pretty impressive effect. Like, you could argue that there's a lot of that like death DNA, especially when death went more progressive, but they do their own thing. there's definitely bands, and we'll get to one in particular, that do that resurgence old school sound where it's just sort of like almost copy paste of what's already been done, but not Horrendous. Horrendous definitely like have their own very defined sound that's clearly rooted in all that stuff, but just does something absolutely spectacular with it. Not quite perfection tier. I don't love like every single song, every single album, but especially their last one too. And I feel like we're due for a new one pretty soon. Was just phenomenal. That was the point where I finally sort of like it clicked and I got it, and I've never looked back. So I'm going to put them also at fantastic. Abnormality. Awesome group that I discovered like some artists through Rock Band, I think was what their song was on. Because, the vocalist actually, she also worked with harmonics and does other like video game development related stuff, so that's kind of interesting. But anyways, music is just brutal. Like this is just super brutal death metal, very much inspired by things like Cannibal Corpse and Dying Fetus. No real frills, but also a band that has, I think, gotten better and better with each album. I really enjoyed also speaking with Malika, the vocalist, on the podcast back when that was my main focus. She was super awesome. It was nice just going over our early influences. Both of us love Deftones, and it's just always neat to hear these like super intense death metal bands able to admit that like, hey, I liked the same gateway kind of stuff that other people did too. I wasn't always this brutal. But anyways, great music, not like top of the pack in terms of like their sound, because there's a lot of just like elements you've heard before, but they do it particularly well. I'm going to put them at good tier. All right, so speaking of old school resurgence bands, we've got a few of them here, but the first of which is Gruesome. And this is like the most obvious one because they are a self-described like death worship band. Each of their albums is basically an encapsulation of an era of death's music, and they do it really well. Like, they do it incredibly well, actually, and I enjoy a lot of it. They put their own little, like, twist on things. It's not exactly a cover band, but it's about as close to a cover band as you can get without hopping over that line. So I enjoy it, but it's not like a go-to for me. I'm going to put them at okay. Back to the technical and progressive side of things, we've got Obscura, which are also just fantastic. And each album a little bit different too. They've gone through a lot of different lineups, had a lot of talented members in and out of the band over the years, and they've all sort of brought their own flavors and tastes to it. You've got your more straight up technical albums, you've got your more progressive focused albums, you've got your more melodic death metal albums like the most recent one. And so yeah, I like their stuff a lot. Maybe not as much as like Archspire, Horrendous, Venom Prison. Something about it just doesn't connect as much. It's a little bit like colder and a little bit more detached for me, but still top tier stuff. I'm going to put it at great tier. I think they fit pretty closely with like Inferi. All right, more like modern old school death metal bands we could put it. We've got Tomb Mold. A lot of people singing this band's praises. I appreciate it. I enjoy listening to it, but those just like newer bands that are just basically redoing the old style, it just doesn't appeal to me as much. I think they do it well, but it's just still kind of okay, not my thing. Same thing goes for Gatecreeper, like very intense, heavy, fast. You bring in those D beats, fun to listen to. And I'm sure like seeing them live, I would have an absolute blast. But as far as the other bands on this list, I'm just more inclined towards bands that are really bringing the technical proficiency, really developing their own kind of sound, their own niche, evolving the genre in some way. And so these bands just don't really do that. So for that reason, they go towards the bottom. Another great modern band with a lot of mix of influences in progressive, melodic, technical, all that stuff. Allegaeon, excellent band. Every album, again, a little bit different. Their most recent one, too, is already, like, probably one of my favorite death metal albums of 2022. Bringing elements of, like, Opeth and Dark Tranquility, but also fusing it with their more technical, proggy side. Bringing in more clean vocals, which some people are not cool with, but I think works really well for them, and they're done spectacularly. Like, if you've got a good singer, please, by all means, bring the cleans and make it work. And I think that they absolutely do. I'm going to put them at great tier. All right, the Black Dahlia Murder. This was a tough one because they are for all intents and purposes, like, one of my favorite bands. I have their patch on the vest. Where is it? There it is. And, you know, every time they drop an album, I'm excited to hear it. The thing is, I can't really put them at perfection because they just put out the same album every time. And I'm fine with that because they do it so well. Like, they made their own sound and kind of forged a path in melodic death metal that was a little bit different. That doesn't really sound like anyone else. And now there's plenty of bands who are like trying to do it, but nobody can do it as well as they do it. So really high up, I'm going to put them at like the top of fantastic tier. They've got almost a flawless discography. So in between me filming this and putting it up, as many of you already know, Trevor sadly passed away. It's still weird even saying that out loud. Like, I'm not generally one that when a musician I enjoy passes away, it hits me hard, but I don't know. I just remember myself picking up Unhallowed in high school and how much I enjoyed that record and what this band has meant to me, and how I've always held Trevor as like kind of the gold standard for modern death metal vocals. So just wanted to say my condolences to his family, his friends, and the band. On the other hand, we've got Ulcerate. Speaking of bands that like forged the way with a completely different sound, these guys are in a league of their own. I get to see them live, which is always great, especially when it's like a band from way overseas that you're not sure you're going to get to see that often. I saw them in a tiny little hole-in-the-wall show, which was great, very up close and personal, and they just killed it just as well as they do on the record. The drumming, of course, is absolutely insane. Probably the most proficient drummer on this entire list, kind of going toe-to-toe with Artificial Brain. Like, those are pretty head-to-head, and then the guitar work, too, just like dissonant, dark, very kind of blackened stuff, more focused on the atmosphere of things, and holy shit, like, you listen to these albums and you kind of just want to die. Like, it's just misery music. Yet again, like, I'm not into that like super depressive stuff, but something about how they do it just works for me, and I'm just in awe of their performances. So I'm going at Perfection, another band. I don't think they have a bad album, and they're just excellent. Benighted, another band I threw in because I'm a big fan of this French band, very on the same level, I would say, as kind of like the Black Dahlia Murder and Aborted. And in fact, they've done collabs with both of those bands. They also have a little bit more of like this blackened flavor to them, a little bit more like wretch in the vocals, a little bit more grisly. They're awesome. Like their last two albums, I want to say in particular, plus there was an EP in between, I think, all excellent. And then there's plenty of stuff to dig into beyond that too. And y'all know I always like to throw in some kind of underdogs that maybe not as many people are familiar with, because I don't hear people talking about this band as much, but I think they're every bit as talented as, again, Aborted and the Black Dahlia Murder. So if you love those bands, you need to check them out. I'm going to put them at good tier, pretty high up, just because I don't think they quite match the level of some of these other ones, but yeah, they belong on this list. And then last but not least, I wasn't even sure if I was going to include Portal because they actually did form in the 90s, but they didn't start releasing full albums until the 2000s, and someone in the Discord threw them out. I was kind of like, I don't know if they really fit in on this list, but ultimately, I do think that Portal are one of the best death metal bands around right now. Again, if you want atmosphere, then you either go with Ulcerate or you go with Portal. And Portal is just like in a complete league of their own. I'd say they're kind of like the Deathspell Omega of death metal, in that they're just doing something that is completely different than what everyone else is doing. And again, now you hear bands kind of trying to do similar styles, a lot of them quite good, by the way. But Portal is just Portal. Like, you can't find another band that's going to put a grandfather clock on their head and perform live in that way. And their albums are just like a total mindfuck, like very just Lovecraftian, otherworldly. It's like entering a portal into this eldritch dimension. You really can't go wrong with these guys. I'm also going to put them very high at Perfection. But y'all check out this playlist for my rankings of classic death metal bands if you haven't seen that already. I've got a whole playlist of these other metal tier lists. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think? What band would you put on this list that maybe I didn't? And what is your favorite? But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.